Hi, I'm Shan Wu with an undercolor of law analysis of a really extraordinary conflict of interest as far as lawyer conflicts go. Put up the headline for you. This is Ed Martin. We've talked about him before. He is the interim acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. That's my former office. And he's pending confirmation, but when he's pending, he's considered the acting or the interim. But just to give you a sense of Ed Martin's style, he sent out an office-wide email instructing all attorneys to only refer to him in court papers as U.S. Attorney, not acting. Now, just as background, I've worked for a host of distinguished prosecutors, many of them career ones, who served as acting U.S. Attorney in D.C. None of them insisted on being called the U.S. Attorney while they're in the acting capacity. It's a little bit of a petty ego thing that he's sending out such a weird email that way. And I just want to point out, that's the office where I grew up. I really know that office very well. I had my first jury trial there. I was hired by a Republican administration, a Republican U.S. Attorney, served under Republican U.S. Attorneys, Democratic U.S. Attorneys. Let me tell you, this particular interim U.S. Attorney who was looking to be nominated to be the permanent one, different category. His background is amazingly lacking, as we've discussed before, in criminal prosecution background or criminal law background, and most importantly, zero ties to the DC community. This office, you all may already know this, but it's a very unique office. This and the U.S. Virgin Islands are the only places where the federal U.S. Attorney's Office takes care of all the street crime. We're like the local DAs. We're like the Manhattan DA in New York. And so there's a very unique place that occupies, and so you really have to know the community. You have to be a member of that community. When I was once a candidate trying to be nominated for that position, and there are like 6 or 7 of us, we all were veterans of the office, we all spent a lot of time, including me, gathering community support for that. Mr. Martin doesn't appear to have any community support in DC because he's never lived in DC. Maybe he was there briefly, I don't know, but he comes from St. Louis. Let's put up his DOJ official bio. And so note that in the bio, it says he's sworn in as the interim, but the headline says U.S. Attorney, as though he's already been confirmed. That's simply not true. He's not confirmed yet. His background is he studied in Rome at the Gregorian Pontifical University and then St. Louis Law School. For the past 2 decades, he's practiced law while engaging in public service. He was chief of staff to the governor of Missouri. He ran for office there. He's basically a political operative, not a criminal law attorney. He was chair of the GOP party there. Okay, fine. He's a political appointee. That's okay. But it's really rare in my time that there's been a U.S. Attorney in D.C. with zero ties to D.C. and zero experience with criminal law, much less criminal law in D.C. However, despite that, in his 2 decades of practice, he must have heard of and adhered to the basic common sense notion of conflicts of interests for lawyers. That's what makes this headline that we started with really extraordinary. I mean, Reuters broke the story first, but he represented January 6th defendants, and one of his clients, when he became U.S. Attorney, he moved to dismiss the case against his own client. All right, so let's take a look at in Missouri, where he reportedly is licensed to practice law, and let's take a look at the rule about conflicts of interest. We hear about this all the time, conflicts of interest, but let's take a dive into what the rule actually says. So we'll put it up for you and we'll read along together. So Section A, except as provided in Rule 417, subsection B, a lawyer shall not represent a client if the representation involves a concurrent conflict of interest. It goes on to define what is a concurrent conflict of interest. A concurrent conflict of interest exists if, 1, the representation of one client will be directly adverse to another client. Let's stop there for a second. He represented a defendant being charged by the government, and now he is representing the government who is prosecuting that defendant. So it seems like it's directly adverse to one another, right? 2, is there a significant risk that the representation of one or more clients will be materially limited by the lawyer's responsibilities to another client, former client, or a third person, or by a personal interest of the lawyer? So if you take a look at that, yeah, there's a significant risk it's going to be limited. How can he really advocate for his client if he's also prosecuting his client? How can he really advocate for his client, the United States? We'll talk about that in a second. Who is your client when you're a prosecutor? How can he advocate as a prosecutor when he'd be advocating against his own client? And lastly, it says, notwithstanding the existence of a conflict of interest under Rule 1.7a, that's the above, a lawyer may still represent a client if the lawyer reasonably believes that the lawyer can provide competent and diligent representation to each of the affected clients, and the representation is not prohibited by law, and the representation does not involve the assertion of a claim by one client against another client represented by the lawyer in the same litigation. Sorry to laugh, but it's just so obvious. I mean, they're in the same litigation. He's the prosecutor and he's the defense counsel. It does also give the out, and this is important, each affected client could give informed consent, formal consent, because it has to be confirmed in writing. That one's important because there's going to be some reporting on that issue. So let's go through that, right? Representation is obviously directly adverse. It's also the adversities affecting his ability to represent either one. And so let's look at that. Who are the clients? Obviously, the human being is his client, the January 6th defendant. I think it's a guy named Padilla. And now, as the U.S. attorney, who is a prosecutor's client? Oftentimes people think, oh, the victim of the crime is the prosecutor's client. They're not, actually. They're a victim of a crime, a complainant, a witness. The prosecutor represents the people. For state DAs, you often hear them talk about the people charge so-and-so, or the state of California, the state of so-and-so charges so-and-so. When there's a federal prosecutor, it's the United States of America that you represent. So when I used to stand up in court, I'd say Shan Wu on behalf of the United States, standard opening line. So that's who he represents, the people of the United States as represented through the Justice Department. His January 6th defendant was being prosecuted by the people of the United States. And now he's head of the DC office, interim, that is charging his own client. Now, Reuters did a great job of breaking this story, but I do want to point out that they note that the state rules in Missouri, where Martin is licensed, quoting, also bar government lawyers from handling cases involving their clients without written consent. All right, that's impossible here. First of all, I doubt he got written consent from his client. Talk about that in a sec. But how's he going to get written consent from the people of the United States to do this? It's just not factually possible. That's not how prosecutors can get consent. I mean, I suppose they can come up with some charade where the Attorney General grants him some special dispensation, but really, factually, it's impossible to do that. Not to mention, I'm sure he didn't bother to seek it from the actual person he could get it from, the client. Nor do you think the client would have objected? I mean, talk about hitting the jackpot. It's like, hey, my defense lawyer is now the prosecutor. Haha, better have paid your bills, right? Not relevant here, because Martin's defense to being accused of a conflict of interest is he says he did the case pro bono. In an office-wide email that was seen by Reuters, Martin says, I'm quoting from their reporting, on Wednesday, Martin sent an office-wide email seen by Reuters in which he said he had, quote, stopped all involvement in the cases more than a year and a half ago, that he had handled them pro bono, and said that he was, quote, under the impression that I was off the cases. He also said that the U.S. Attorney's career ethics lawyer asked him about the cases last week, and then Martin complains in this email, quote, immediately leaked to the media. This leak, Martin said, was both, quote, personally insulting, unquote, and professionally unacceptable, unquote. All right, first, it's not a defense to the conflict of interest that it was a pro bono client, if that's true. I mean, it's not like pro bono clients are fake clients. They're clients. You're just not being paid by the client or being paid for the service. It doesn't somehow make them a second tier or lower category of clients to whom you owe no ethical duty. So that's totally irrelevant. Also, really of concern, he was unaware he was still representing the client. I mean, the guy's charged in a criminal case and he doesn't know if he's still representing him or not. That's kind of a little bit suspicious. Who did he think had taken over the case if he was no longer representing the guy? Of course, he also whines about it being leaked to the media. It was a public record that he was the defense counsel. It's not some leak. Why do you even need to have a leak for it? And, he's personally insulted and professionally unacceptable. Yeah, you're not the only one who feels that way about the whole episode. Now, ethics complaints have now been filed against him, with at least one reported as being filed by the 65 Project. I'll put up a link to them. They do a lot of really important work. I mean, they're named that because of the 65 baseless lawsuits that were filed by Trump supporters claiming fraud in the 2020 elections. Many of those ethical complaints are still pending. Resolution takes a long time through the bar systems, it's really a self-policing system. And although the serious ones do tend to get sunlight and do tend to resolve properly, it's self-policing. It takes a really long time, and that process moves very slowly. But we have had some results here. Perhaps most notably, Rudy Giuliani has been disbarred in 2 jurisdictions. I think he's still appealing that, of course. Now, one last thing. Martin, the acting U.S. Attorney for D.C., was himself present on January 6th at the Capitol. And he tweeted live from the Capitol. We'll put up the tweet for you. He says, "I'm at the Capitol right now, and I was at the POTUS speech earlier. Rowdy crowd, but nothing out of hand. Ignore the fake news." Right? Looks like the timestamp on that's about 2:53. Check out the footage from the January 6th hearings. Very graphic footage. Let's warn you about that. It's very violent, cursing. Let's play some of that footage and notice the timestamp.
Lock the shields! Lock them together! Lock them together! We need fresh patriots in the front! Jimmy, get him to the back! Get him to the back! Get him to the back! Let's get some fresh faces up front!
So I guess Martin was like in a different part of the riot, all quiet where he was, right? We'll continue to stay with this story and help keep the sunlight on his tenure. Remember, he still needs to be confirmed, so we can let our members of Congress know just what we think about his fitness to lead the nation's capital's federal prosecution office. That's it for now. We'll keep our eye on this. Keep those comments and replies coming. There's so much to cover, and do follow me on Blue Sky. Try and sort of keep abreast of the breaking things as they're happening, and we'll dive into them a little bit more in our talks with you. All right, talk to you soon.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.